We're going to talk about coaching frameworks today. And I'm sure some of you are looking at these like, I have that book, or I've wondered about getting that book. So, this is just to say there's so much information about early intervention coaching. This is a picture of my collection of books and things that I've read, I've pulled from. And so there's so many different approaches, which is wonderful and also can be overwhelming. So I'm going to try to break it down and just kind of say, like, what's the framework we're going to reference when we're together in this community, in this group together? So I found this really great occupational therapist at the time she was a student. You can look at her website. She has done an amazing job. I actually just contacted her by email. I'm going to see if she can come talk to our group, but she developed a really great website with so many resources. And she did a Facebook survey, I think it was in 2020. And she said, what coaching framework or what method of coaching are you specifically using? So she didn't have a ton of respondents, but those she did have, the most of them reported they were using methods by Rush and Sheldon, which is going to be this book. This is the first edition. So most of you, if you have the second one, it's yellow. And that the others, another majority were, a small majority, were using family guided routines-based intervention, or FGRBI, which most of you know is the format that I grew up with, that Dr. Julian Woods, my mentor, has developed. So these seem to be the ones that I hear referenced the most, and I often share from this perspective because it's what I know the most about. But then the remaining respondents didn't label a method. They, they just said, they described like, well, this is how I coach families. And for the most part, that's going to be based on things like these other, programs or formats or tidbits or things they've learned or experienced. And that's perfectly fine as well. So my, just as an overview, so many of you are familiar with the Rush and Sheldon coaching framework or coaching method, which includes having a joint plan, observing, in-action coaching, reflection, and feedback. Okay. And then, so this is just an overview. I'm not teaching their method today. I'm just talking about an overview. And then FGRBI, which uses also a similar type of cycle. So they use the super cycle, which is setting the stage, observation, problem solving and planning, and then review and reflection. Okay. So if you want more resources on these, you have the books, you have links. I included FGRBI is filled with links. So if you go here to this link in your handouts, you're going to see just a few specific links related to their super cycle, and just FGRBI's format. Okay. So that you don't have to, it's great to navigate the whole website, but my goal is not to overwhelm people. It's to simplify and make it tangible so we can go out and feel comfortable doing it. Okay. So what do all these approaches, all these different frameworks and methods, they have something in common. Okay. They might not be the same. The researchers, of course, we've talked about this in Coach to Coach before. They have to have a specific framework and model to do research, to measure fidelity, to see how it's being used, to see if it's effective. That's great. We don't have to do that for our purposes. We have to just say, well, what is it based on? How do I have a foundation? If I can't do it perfectly, can I still do it good enough to know that I'm being family centered? And so, yes, of course. So that's how we, meet here and talk about and problem solve together. But all of these methods are based on adult learning principles. That's what coaching strategies are. Okay. And those adult learning principles are things like repetition, right? We learn best when we repeat something. That's why routines are valuable, because they repeat often every day. We learn in functional contexts, when we problem solve, when we get opportunities to self-reflect, and when we have chances to actually practice, not just watch. And when we learn in small doses, so a little bit of information at a time. If you want to really deep dive on reviewing adult learning principles, then in your Coach to Coach platform, you have the crash course. And that's about a 50-minute pre-recorded course that I did with Ida a couple years ago, just on adult learning theory and principles. So I would say go back to that if you want to review there. But knowing that all of these other methods are based on adult learning principles, I said, okay, how am I going to disseminate this in a way that we can remember? And maybe it's being in Los Angeles because of the industry here, but I'm going to introduce it today as lights, camera, action, and a wrap. Okay. So I hope you guys enjoy this little way that I thought to introduce it. And I want us to try to visualize our home visits under this lens or through this framework. Okay, so the lights would be like setting the stage or joint planning in the Russian Sheldon method or setting the stage in the FGRBI method. And I think about it as if I come in and I just either start coaching or start working directly with a child, it's almost like being in the dark, right? Like I don't have the background information I need or the foundation. So I need some lights. I need to set the stage. I need to learn a little bit more. So that's that check-in period where, we get the family updates, we hear how the last week went, we find out what the parent priorities are. And then this is the part that's often missing, besides just checking in with the family. What are the intervention updates? So, what did we actually practice and try, and how did it go? Okay. And this piece is also probably the hardest, which is the actual planning for today's visit. So, hey, how was your week? What feels important? Did you get a chance to try this? And what are we going to practice together today and where? Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of how to have that conversation in all the different ways right now, because we're going to elaborate on that over the course of our year together. But for the most part, that's what comes up for you guys a lot. And even in my own experience, it's kind of hard to feel like we're putting families on the spot sometimes to be like, well, what's our plan for today? Okay. But we're going to get there together. So when we're doing this initial part, right, getting information, being in the light, understanding what's happening for that family today in our time together, the most common coaching strategies that we're using are information sharing and direct teaching and reflection, okay, in this part of our home visit cycle. All right. So after that, we can move into the next piece, which both Russian Sheldon and FGRBI talk about is observation. So we're thinking about, do we have a moment in our home visits where we're like the camera, like we're not interacting, we're literally watching. It doesn't mean it has to be 20 minutes of watching. FGRBI would say 20 seconds is good, right? 20 seconds of not being involved, but watching so that you have the chance to see what is the context, who is involved, what's going well, what are the strengths of the caregiver, the child's strengths, what dyadic strengths are happening between them, what about the strengths of this specific routine? Okay, so this is the next element or part of the framework. Okay, and then this is where we see our opportunities for practice. So the biggest coaching strategies used at this part is generally observation and feedback. That strengths-based feedback, very specific feedback, or even general feedback, like this looks great, or I love the way you're getting down on his level and pausing before da da da, or you're giving that strengths-based feedback based on what you observed. Okay. And then the next part of the framework is action. So this is where we actually have the parent practice. Okay, so now we've, observed, we've given some feedback, and now we can start actually practicing or planning what to practice. So we might say, some of our problem solving might occur here. So in action, coaching can happen during play and during routines. And also, it's where we see so many of these coaching strategies, right? We might directly teach something, we might demonstrate something, narrate it, and then turn it over for the parent to try. We're also able to offer more feedback. So the parent's practicing and we're saying, like, that's going great, keep going, or slow down, or whatever, guided practice and feedback we're giving that parent. And so this is the actual action that a lot of people find hard to get into if you're newer to coaching or newer to EI, or hard to expand on. They might get it a little bit in play, but having that big struggle transitioning it into daily routines. I would say for those who have completed the surveys so far, this is actually your number one thing coming up across the board that so many people can relate to, which is feeling stuck in play. Okay, so just to validate that that's hard for everyone, and that's why I just talk about routines so much because play tends to be easier for us. All right. So the next part of the cycle is the wrap, right? So do you picture in your home visits like the wrap party? Like we just watched, we finished, we did it. Now we're going to watch the movie, like replay what happened in our mind and discuss how it went. How did that feel? Are we happy with this plan for the week? What is the plan for the week? What do we want to work on? What did we like best? This is, the reflection part that's included across the board, we know is valuable for adult learners to solidify their learning. They have to really having the opportunity to reflect. One of the resources I shared from FGRBI, if you go back to that page of links, you'll see super reflection questions. So if you're looking for reflection questions, that's a really nice one. One thing we know about reflection is that it can happen all throughout the visit. Okay, so this is where some people get, a little bit like, oh, I didn't start with this, or we jumped right into a routine. Just because I'm showing you it like a cycle doesn't mean you can't have some reflection at the beginning or some reflection, in action coaching. These elements are going to integrate and cross over. And that's just because you're going with the flow of real life. It's never going to be this perfect cycle that we hit this, we moved on to that. And, the FGRBI method would say, we actually want to see this type of a cycle happening for each routine or each activity. So for example, if it's, let's just say buckling in a car seat, maybe setting the stage is something like, how's that going? What did we want him to be able to do here? Okay, parent says they wanted them to, be regulated. They don't like to be in the car. So the parent's been practicing singing a favorite song, right? Then we might observe how that goes. The parent, gives some feedback that seems to be going well. Problem solve. What do you think is the next step? Again, I'm just choosing coaching strategies at random. These would change depending on the context with the family. And then the wrap, what do we want to try this week? Starting the cycle all over again for a different routine or a play activity. Okay, remember today is just an overview. We're going to come back to this over and over because that's how we learn over time. Small, break it down, little bits of learning at a time. Okay, so this is like the ideal. But knowing that the ideal never plays out exactly that way because it's real life and our jobs are not going to be automated because we're real people who can get in there and adjust and navigate and shift as we need to. So we're doing some reflection, but oh, he's starting to show an interest in that. Let's transition. Let's get to something in action because that's meaningful in this moment. And that's what's hard about being coaches too, is we have to pivot very quickly many times. All right, so that was a lot, but I wanted to give it to you so we could think about it. So now I really want us to emphasize this year in Coach to Coach, having time for our own self-reflection. Okay, so this is going to be for the next 4 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes. We're all just going to sit quietly and think about what we talked about and visualize. Are these components happening in my home visits? Yes, they're happening. No, they're not. And, the answer is not just that straightforward, yes or no. How are they happening? Okay, yeah, I'm checking in. Hey, how was your week? Okay, but you know what? I'm not really asking how the intervention plan went, or I'm not really, doing a great job with some families with this part of the day, but this part of the visit, but with other families, I feel really good about it. So go through this in your mind because we want to be able to see and assess our own growth, to identify our own strengths, and then to be able to build from them. So, hey, this is going really well with most of my families. I think I could get it with, a few other families that I'm noticing it's harder with because I'm building from my own strengths. So let's just take, 4 to 5 minutes right now to think about our own experience right now. If you're a student or you're not yet coaching, use this time to visualize what that might look or feel like, or what questions you might want to ask about this process.